The mansion was glowing under the golden lights, every corner decorated with elegance and extravagance that made even the most experienced guests gasp. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, reflecting tiny rainbows on the marble floors. The smell of expensive perfumes mixed with gourmet food filled the air, and soft music played in the background, setting a luxurious yet relaxed atmosphere. Guests dressed in designer clothes moved gracefully around the hall, chatting and laughing, sipping champagne, and taking in the wealth surrounding them. At the center of it all was the billionaire, a man who had built his empire through shrewd business moves, bold risks, and a personality as large as his wealth. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit, his confidence radiating from every gesture. He loved attention, not just for the money he had, but for the power and admiration it brought him. This evening was no different. He wanted to be the center of everyone's eyes, the star of his own show. After a few drinks, the billionaire stood on a small elevated platform, clinking his glass to gather everyone's attention. His voice boomed confidently, and even though it was meant to be casual, there was a sharp edge of pride in it. He began talking about his accomplishments, subtly reminding everyone of the fortune he controlled, the yachts he owned, and the exclusive parties he threw. The crowd listened politely, some nodding in admiration, others exchanging amused glances at his obvious self-love. Then, with a mischievous glint in his eye, he leaned closer to the microphone and made the boldest declaration of the evening. He laughed loudly, throwing his head back as if daring anyone to challenge him. "I'll make this night unforgettable," he said. "Anyone who thinks they can dance better than me, step forward, and I'll give you $100 million. A stunned silence followed for a moment. And then a ripple of laughter moved through the room. Guests chuckled, thinking he was joking or just showing off. Some whispered to each other, calling him arrogant, while others shook their heads, half amused, half annoyed by his overconfidence. He wasn't just offering money, he was putting himself on display, confident that no one in the room could ever outshine him. Dancing had always been a way for him to show dominance, his body language as controlled and precise as his business moves. He believed that wealth and confidence made him untouchable, and in that moment, he felt invincible. The guests, used to such dramatic declarations, expected him to laugh at anyone daring enough to try, imagining the embarrassment of a failed challenger. As he stepped down from the platform to demonstrate his skills, the music shifted, inviting him to move. His steps were practiced, smooth, and exaggerated in the kind of way that screamed, "Look at me, I am unmatched." His arms swung, feet tapped, and spins dazzled the eyes of the audience. Some clapped politely, some cheered, but all were watching to see just how far his arrogance would go. It was a performance meant to intimidate, a challenge wrapped in spectacle. Meanwhile, in the background, the staff quietly moved about their duties, unnoticed by the glamorous guests. Among them was the maid, a young woman with a humble presence, quietly balancing a tray of drinks, her hands steady, her eyes sharp. She observed the scene with curiosity rather than fear. She had seen many wealthy and boastful people in her life, and yet there was something unusually bold about this particular challenge. Something in the billionaire's laugh, in the way he expected unquestioned admiration, made the air almost electric. Little did anyone in the room know, this moment, this so-called challenge, would become unforgettable for a reason no one could have predicted. That arrogant laugh, that confident declaration, was about to meet something, or someone, completely unexpected. The stage was set for a moment that would change the mood of the entire evening, a story that guests would talk about for years. Though everyone in the room thought this was just entertainment, a rich man showing off, in reality, it was the beginning of an event that would leave pride humbled, laughter silenced, and respect earned in the most astonishing way. And as the billionaire continued to bask in the glow of his confidence, he had no idea that a quiet, unnoticed maid, standing far from the spotlight, was about to turn his world upside down. She wasn't just watching the dance, she was watching him, analyzing, waiting, and preparing. The night of laughter and arrogance had only just begun, but the first cracks in the billionaire's confidence were already forming. The contrast was stark, the opulence, the arrogance, the expectation of control, against the quiet, unassuming presence of someone from the shadows, and that contrast, invisible to most, was the spark for what would become a legendary moment in the lives of everyone present. The billionaire thought he owned the night, but the story had other plans, plans that would leave him not laughing, but humbled, and everyone else astonished. While the billionaire was still basking in his own confidence, the guests continued to chatter among themselves, sharing amused glances and betting quietly on who might even dare take the challenge. Everyone assumed that no one in the glittering hall would have the courage, or the skill, to step forward. The idea of dancing better than a man of such wealth and arrogance seemed impossible. After all, in their minds, talent and poise came hand in hand with status, and status certainly wasn't on the side of a humble maid. But as the laughter of the billionaire echoed through the room, a small movement in the corner caught the attention of a few observant guests. There, near the buffet table, a young woman paused, her tray of drinks trembling slightly in her hands. Her eyes were calm, focused, and strangely daring. She didn't speak at first, but her gaze locked on the billionaire as if silently saying, "I accept." The room didn't notice her at first. After all, she was just a maid, unnoticed in the shadow of crystal chandeliers, designer dresses, and gold-plated accents. But when she began to step forward, a few guests muttered in disbelief, "Is she serious? She can't possibly think she can win. This is going to be a disaster." The billionaire, meanwhile, caught sight of her moving through the crowd, and at first, he laughed, thinking it was a joke. How cute, he thought, a little girl playing with big people. His smirk widened, his confidence swelling further. The maid didn't hesitate. She walked with a quiet, steady determination, every step confident despite the stares, whispers, and occasional snickers from the wealthy audience. Her uniform might have been simple, her shoes practical, but there was a fire in her eyes, an unspoken history of struggle, discipline, and hidden talent. Every step toward the dance floor was a silent declaration. She would not be underestimated. When she finally reached the center of the room, the music shifted, signaling it was her turn. The billionaire, still grinning, gestured dramatically for her to begin, thinking this would be entertaining, perhaps even humiliating. But the maid didn't falter. She didn't glance at him nervously. She didn't beg for permission. She simply positioned herself, poised like someone who had done this countless times before. Her stance was firm yet graceful, her shoulders relaxed but ready, her presence commanding attention without a word. The guests, previously laughing and whispering, were now silent, eyes fixed on the contrast before them. On one side stood the man who believed wealth and confidence equaled skill, on the other, a young woman who had never sought fame but carried in her movements a lifetime of discipline, resilience, and untapped brilliance. Some of the onlookers began to feel a shift in the air, a subtle tension replacing the amusement. They couldn't explain it, but they sensed that this wasn't going to be an ordinary performance. For a brief moment, the billionaire's smile faltered, just slightly, as he realized she wasn't hesitating, wasn't scared, and wasn't impressed by him or his wealth. His laughter, once so loud and contagious, now seemed a little forced, a little unsure. He had thrown down a challenge thinking it would highlight his superiority, but somehow, just her presence hinted at the possibility of defeat. The maid waited for the first beat of the music, and when it came, she moved. Each step, each sway, was confident and precise, yet there was a fluidity, an elegance, that made it feel effortless. Her movements told a story of countless hours of practice in secret, of sacrifices made quietly, of dreams deferred yet never forgotten. The audience gasped subtly, some leaning forward in disbelief. Some whispered to themselves, "I didn't know she could move like that, she's incredible." The billionaire, watching closely now, could feel his heart skip, a rare emotion for a man who thought he controlled everything in his life. His arrogance, his laughter, his superiority, all were starting to crack under the weight of her skill. He had laughed at her before, but now, that same laughter threatened to turn against him. The room, once buzzing with casual amusement, now held its collective breath, everyone sensing that something extraordinary was happening, something that would not just entertain but humiliate pride itself. The maid, humble and unassuming, had transformed into the very center of attention, commanding admiration without even trying. And in that moment, it became clear, this was not a mistake, a joke, or a gamble. It was a silent, powerful declaration that greatness could come from anywhere, that talent and courage were not measured by wealth, uniform, or social position. And as the first notes of her performance began to fill the hall, no one, not even the billionaire, could predict the storm that was about to unfold. As the maid stood at the center of the room, poised and calm, a ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Some guests leaned toward each other, raising eyebrows and smirking. Is she really going to do this? One whispered, "She's just a maid, this will be hilarious," said another. Their words dripped with doubt, amusement, and a touch of cruelty for most of the wealthy guests. It was almost unthinkable that someone from the household staff could ever challenge the billionaire, let alone outperform him. The billionaire himself crossed his arms and laughed, a sound that rang through the hall like a warning. "Go ahead, little lady," he said with a mocking grin, "show us what you've got." His eyes sparkled with condescension, certain that her performance would be awkward at best, and humiliating at worst. He even called out a few sarcastic instructions, jokingly offering to give her pointers, as if teaching a child how to walk for the first time. The room erupted in nervous laughter at his antics, reinforcing the idea that this was a spectacle meant to entertain him, not a real competition. Some of the more skeptical guests whispered insults under their breath, focusing on her appearance. "Look at her uniform, it's all wrinkled," one muttered. "She doesn't even have the right shoes," said another. They thought her small frame and quiet demeanor were proof that she could never match the billionaire's bravado. The laughter grew louder as she ignored them, moving closer to the dance floor, unbothered by the judgment and whispers. Her focus remained steady, a quiet intensity that only made the crowd's curiosity grow. Even the music seemed to pause for a moment, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. The guests who had initially cheered for the billionaire's confident display now shifted in their seats, a strange mix of curiosity and doubt spreading among them. Some wondered whether perhaps, against all odds, she might surprise them, but most dismissed it quickly, convincing themselves it was impossible for someone so ordinary to challenge someone so wealthy and skilled. The maid didn't speak, didn't respond to the mocking comments or rolling eyes. She simply looked at the billionaire, her gaze unwavering. Her eyes weren't full of fear or awe, but determination. She had faced challenges far greater than laughter and scorn, challenges that had tested her in ways the billionaire could never imagine. And now, in this gilded hall filled with wealth and pride, she was about to face yet another one, silently telling herself that her moment had finally come. A few guests began to notice a subtle shift, the kind of tension that comes before something remarkable. They saw how she held herself, how she breathed steadily, how every small gesture was filled with grace. They realized that perhaps this wasn't going to be just another amusing display. Perhaps she was hiding a secret, a skill the billionaire had never anticipated. But even as curiosity grew, doubt still clung to the majority of the room like a shadow. They wanted to believe in the impossible, yet their minds refused, conditioned by status, wealth, and expectation. Meanwhile, the billionaire, still smiling, began to feel a flicker of unease, a tiny crack in his armor of arrogance. He had always assumed that confidence and money would intimidate anyone, yet this quiet maid showed no fear, no hesitation, no signs of inferiority. Her calmness, her composure, began to challenge his own self-assuredness, and for the first time that evening, he wondered whether he had underestimated someone entirely. The guests laughed nervously at his brief hesitation, still unwilling to believe she could compete. "This is going to be fun," someone whispered, watching him fall flat on his face. Others were more contemplative, noticing the contrast, the unexpected determination of someone who, by all appearances, shouldn't have been there. And in that growing mix of doubt and curiosity, the room held its collective breath, waiting for the first note, the first move, the first proof that would either confirm their skepticism or shatter it entirely. And so, with every mocking glance, every whispered insult, the stage was set. The contrast between arrogance and humility, wealth and talent, expectation and surprise, had never been more stark. Every eye in the hall now subtly shifted toward the maid, not in mockery, but in anticipation. The whispers of doubt had planted a seed, and now, as the first beat of music approached, everyone felt it. Something extraordinary was about to unfold, something that could turn mockery into awe, doubt into amazement, and laughter into stunned silence. The billionaire laughed once more, though it sounded slightly forced this time, confident yet uneasy, completely unaware that the performance about to begin would challenge not only his pride but the very assumptions everyone in the room had held. And the maid, calm and ready, took a final deep breath, preparing to show the world what true skill looked like. The room grew quiet as the music shifted, signaling the billionaire's turn to take the floor. All eyes turned toward him, eager to see the man whose confidence seemed unshakable. The guests leaned in, champagne glasses paused mid-air, waiting for the show to begin. He stood tall, chest out, every movement exaggerated to draw attention. His smirk returned, though this time there was a subtle edge of competitiveness. A need to prove not just skill but dominance. He started slowly, his feet tapping in precise patterns, the rhythm perfectly in sync. His arms waved and swayed, each movement sharp, calculated, and dramatic. Every step seemed to scream, "I am the best, no one can beat me." Guests nodded politely, some clapping along, but the overall air was one of expectation rather than awe. His performance was flawless in technique, yet it carried the arrogance of someone performing for validation, not for the joy of dance. Then, with a dramatic flourish, he spun across the marble floor, his custom shoes glinting under the chandeliers. He finished with a pose, chest puffed out, arms raised, and a confident grin plastered across his face. The audience applauded, some genuinely impressed, others slightly nervous, sensing that confidence could be deceiving, but for him, it was a victory before the battle had even begun. He believed the challenge had already been won, that his ego and skill would make it impossible for anyone to surpass him. He looked at the maid, standing quietly at the edge of the room, and laughed, a rich, booming sound that filled the hall. "Well," he said, his tone teasing, "do you even have a chance?" His eyes sparkled with amusement, but beneath it, there was a flicker of curiosity, a tiny acknowledgement that she might surprise him, though he quickly dismissed it, convincing himself it was impossible. As he moved back to his spot, the guests whispered among themselves, some admiring the billionaire's confidence, others questioning whether humility would ever enter the room. The contrast between wealth and status versus simplicity and talent was stark, but in that moment, everyone assumed the winner was clear. The billionaire had claimed the stage, and it seemed no one could take it from him. He was unaware, however, that his performance, while technically impressive, had one flaw. He had danced for himself, not for the story, not for the heart, and certainly not for the audience. Every move carried pride, but none carried passion. His steps were precise, yet they lacked the emotional depth that comes from struggle, from overcoming, from fighting for something bigger than oneself, and that, unknowingly, would become his undoing. Guests continued to clap politely, but the room felt different now, as if holding its breath for the next chapter. There was a subtle tension that no one could explain, an anticipation building not around him, but around the quiet maid watching patiently. Her gaze was unwavering, and her stillness made the billionaire's energy seem almost theatrical, as if it were a show designed to impress, yet empty of true connection. He smiled at the crowd, confident that the performance had sealed the outcome, his laughter returning stronger now, louder, almost triumphant. The wealthy guests cheered, raising glasses to toast his apparent victory. The music faded, leaving behind the echoes of applause, and he stood in the center of the floor, proud, chest lifted, expecting admiration and awe. And yet, in that same silence, a few of the more attentive guests began to notice a subtle shift, a tiny change in the atmosphere. They noticed how the maid didn't flinch or react in fear, how her eyes followed him not with intimidation but with focus. They sensed that the performance, impressive as it was, might not be enough to secure the victory he assumed was guaranteed. The billionaire, for all his skill, had underestimated something he couldn't measure: raw, untamed talent combined with courage and determination. In that brief, electric moment, the stage had been claimed, yet the real story had not yet begun. The audience, previously captivated by his confidence and power, now instinctively turned their attention toward the unknown, toward the quiet, humble figure who had accepted a challenge that seemed impossible. The billionaire's energy dominated the room, yes, but it also set the stage for contrast, for a revelation that would leave everyone, including him, completely stunned. As he exited the floor with a final flourish, the guests whispered excitedly, some still praising his skill, some nervously wondering, could she really top that? And in the corner of the room, the maid took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying herself, preparing to step forward, ready to transform doubt into astonishment, ready to make the arrogant billionaire rethink everything. The night was far from over, and the real performance, the one no one expected, was about to begin. The room was silent now, the kind of silence that makes every heartbeat feel louder than usual. All eyes had shifted to the maid, who stood at the edge of the dance floor, her uniform simple and neat, her hands still, her posture calm, yet in that calmness lay a quiet power that no one had anticipated. The wealthy guests, who had moments ago been laughing and whispering, now felt a mixture of curiosity, doubt, and a strange excitement building in the air. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, and the subtle sound of her shoes on the marble floor was almost like a drumbeat, announcing that something extraordinary was about to happen. The billionaire watched her, still smirking, but for the first time that evening, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He expected a timid, awkward attempt, a performance that would amuse but ultimately confirm his superiority. Instead, what he saw was someone poised, confident, and completely unafraid. As the music began to play, soft at first, then rising in tempo, she moved. Her steps were light, yet each carried strength, precision, and a rhythm that seemed almost innate. It wasn't just dance, it was storytelling, every movement conveying emotion, energy, and years of hidden discipline. The crowd watched, mesmerized, as she flowed across the floor, her arms and legs moving in perfect harmony, her body telling a story of resilience, determination, and quiet defiance. The billionaire's smirk faltered slightly as he observed the grace and fluidity of her movements. Each spin, each turn, each effortless leap carried a depth he had never expected. His confidence, so solid just moments ago, began to crack, and he instinctively took a step back, as if physically moving away from her growing presence. The audience, too, felt the shift, a collective realization that the woman standing before them was no ordinary maid, and this was no ordinary performance. Whispers began to spread through the crowd, though this time not of mockery but of awe. "She's incredible," someone muttered. "Where did she learn to dance like that?" Another asked. The room, once full of laughter at the billionaire's arrogance, was now completely captivated. Eyes followed her every move, mouth slightly open, hearts racing with the unexpected thrill of witnessing something extraordinary. It became clear that she had trained before, though nobody had known, hidden behind years of humble work, sacrifices, and quiet perseverance. This wasn't talent that appeared overnight, it was skill forged through countless hours of practice, dedication, and determination, talent that had remained unseen because she had chosen humility and survival over fame. But now, in this gilded hall, her skill could no longer remain hidden, and it shone brighter than the chandeliers above. The billionaire attempted to regain his composure, attempting to match her energy with dramatic gestures, fancy spins, and exaggerated movements, but it was already too late. His dance was impressive, yet mechanical, focused on style rather than substance. The maid's performance, by contrast, was alive, electric, and impossible to ignore. She danced not to impress, not to compete, but to express. And in that authenticity, she captivated everyone present. Every eye in the room, from the most skeptical guest to the closest friend of the billionaire, was locked on her. The atmosphere had changed completely, from mockery to awe, from arrogance to tension. The story that had begun as a wealthy man's boast was now shifting toward an outcome no one had expected, and certainly not the billionaire himself. As the music reached its crescendo, she executed a series of complex steps, leaps, and spins with flawless precision. Her movements were perfectly synchronized with the rhythm, yet full of emotion. Each gesture, each pause, drew the audience deeper into the performance. Every eye watched, every heart felt the power of her skill, and every whisper of doubt was replaced by astonishment. And when the music finally stopped, silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence, one filled with disbelief, admiration, and a shared sense of having witnessed greatness. The maid stood there, breath steady, face composed, as if she had merely gone through a simple routine, yet in that quiet, she had shattered expectations, humiliated arrogance, and captured the hearts of everyone in the room. Even the billionaire, proud and confident moments ago, now faced the truth he had refused to see. The quiet maid, unseen, underestimated, had done what no one thought possible. She had transformed doubt into awe, and arrogance into a subtle, creeping fear. The story of the night was no longer about him, it was about her, and the incredible hidden talent that had finally found its stage. The room was still for a moment, as if everyone had collectively forgotten to breathe. All eyes remained locked on the maid, whose performance had just ended in a crescendo of flawless movement. Every guest's mind raced, trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The silence wasn't awkward, it was reverent, a rare kind of awe that left the wealthy audience stunned. Even the billionaire, once overflowing with confidence, now felt his chest tighten with an unfamiliar emotion, uncertainty. It didn't take long for the whispers to begin, small at first, almost hesitant, but growing louder by the second. "Did she really just do that?" One guest murmured. "She's better than him," another admitted in disbelief. the word spread through the crowd like wildfire, each repetition adding weight to the growing shock. Nobody could believe that a young maid, barely noticed all evening, had just outperformed a man whose reputation, wealth, and ego seemed untouchable. The billionaire's eyes darted around the room, seeking validation, expecting someone to laugh, to call it a fluke, to point out some imagined flaw, but the audience offered none of that. Their expressions were a mixture of amazement, admiration, and the kind of respect that comes only after witnessing undeniable talent. His smile, once so proud and confident, faltered, and he felt an unfamiliar sting of embarrassment creeping in. Then came the revelation that deepened the astonishment, the one fact that made the audience's admiration turn into outright awe. It was quietly whispered by one of the guests who had known her story. She, trained professionally, the words spread quickly, murmured from one person to another, as everyone realized the truth. This wasn't luck, a hidden trick, or an amateur performance rising to the occasion. She had once danced at the highest levels, trained in studios and stages that many in the room could only dream of. The billionaire's brow furrowed, his confidence shaken, as he listened to the whispers, trying to dismiss them as exaggeration, but the truth was undeniable, and it hit him harder than he expected. The maid, who had seemed so ordinary, had once been a trained dancer, someone who had dedicated her life to mastering movement, rhythm, and performance, yet life had led her elsewhere, forcing her talent into the shadows, hiding it behind humble work, responsibilities, and survival. The audience now saw her in a new light, understanding the depth behind her calm confidence, the grace in every step, the precision in every movement. They realized that her performance wasn't just skill, it was experience, discipline, and a lifetime of silent preparation finally revealed in a single, breathtaking moment. Gasps and murmurs of disbelief filled the hall, some guests whispering to each other, "All this time, we never knew, she was hidden in plain sight." The quiet maid, once overlooked, had become the center of attention for reasons far beyond wealth or status. Even the billionaire, proud and powerful, had no choice but to confront the truth. He had mocked her, assumed she had no chance, and flaunted his ego in front of the entire room, yet here she stood, triumphant not through arrogance, but through skill, poise, and quiet confidence. His laughter, once booming and dominant, faded into an uneasy silence, replaced by a creeping sense of humility he had not felt in years. The story behind her talent began to emerge slowly, shared by those who had witnessed her journey. She had once dreamed of fame and stages, but life had demanded sacrifice. She had worked in households, taken care of family, and suppressed her passion to survive, yet none of that had diminished her talent. It had only sharpened it, made it resilient, and ready for the moment she now commanded. The audience, captivated, couldn't take their eyes off her. They felt the weight of the revelation, and with it came admiration, respect, and even a sense of inspiration. This was no longer just a dance, it was a story of perseverance, hidden potential, and the triumph of dedication over circumstance. And in the center of the room, the maid remained composed, quiet, yet radiating a confidence that came from knowing her skill had finally been recognized. For the billionaire, the lesson was unavoidable, the truth unavoidable. His pride had led him to underestimate someone based solely on her status, her uniform, and her quiet demeanor, but the maid had shattered every assumption, every expectation, every ounce of arrogance he had carried into the room, and in that moment, everyone realized that the knight would be remembered not for his confidence or wealth, but for the revelation of a hidden talent that had stunned them all. The room, once filled with polite applause and curious whispers, now seemed charged with an entirely different energy. The billionaire, who had moments ago laughed so confidently at his own challenge, now felt a cold knot of anxiety tighten in his chest. Every pair of eyes seemed to be measuring him, not for his wealth, but for his arrogance, and slowly, the truth settled over him like a weight he could not shrug off. He had been outshined, publicly humiliated, and the realization burned hotter than he could have imagined. Guests who had initially sided with him, clinking glasses in admiration of his bravado, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier laughter at the maid's humble position replaced by astonishment and respect. The whispers of admiration were almost mocking in tone toward the billionaire. "I can't believe he lost to her," one guest murmured. "He didn't see that coming, did he?" said another. Each comment felt like a mirror held up to him, reflecting a version of himself he had refused to acknowledge until now. The billionaire's confident grin faltered, replaced by a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He had built his life on control, on power, and on the certainty that wealth could shield him from failure, yet here he was, standing in a room full of people, realizing that none of that mattered. The performance he had once thought would cement his superiority had instead revealed a vulnerability he had never experienced in public. The maid, on the other hand, stood quietly, composed and unshaken. Her presence radiated calm confidence, her breathing steady, her expression serene, yet her triumph was unmistakable. A simple, subtle glance from her toward the billionaire seemed to say, without words, "This is your lesson," and the room felt it too. The shift from amusement to respect was palpable, as if the social hierarchy the billionaire had assumed was now being quietly rewritten before everyone's eyes. The guests, unable to resist the spectacle, began to react more openly, some clapping for the maid, others exchanging looks of disbelief. A few even whispered in hushed tones, "This is the richest man in the country, and he just got humiliated by a maid." The words spread like wildfire, laughter and gasps interweaving, but never at the maid's expense, only at the billionaire's, whose ego was now clearly bruised. He tried to recover, making a few half-hearted gestures, attempting to laugh it off, but the effort only emphasized his embarrassment. His earlier arrogance, once a shield, had become a spotlight on his failure. Every motion he made seemed exaggerated, desperate, and in stark contrast to the effortless, precise movements of the maid. The room seemed to notice, the energy shifting further away from him and toward her. Some of the guests, previously hesitant to speak, began murmuring stories of her skill, sharing anecdotes they had heard about her hidden training. The revelation made his defeat even more undeniable. The billionaire realized that his wealth, his influence, and even his confidence could not erase the undeniable truth. He had been bested, humiliated, and publicly exposed, and he could feel the collective gaze of the room pressing down on him, a mixture of astonishment, amusement, and quiet judgment. Even the staff, who had watched silently from the edges of the room, now dared to smile. Their respect for the maid was obvious, and their eyes subtly mocked the man who had laughed so loudly earlier. The arrogance that had once dominated the hall was replaced by humility. Whether he liked it or not, every beat of silence seemed to accentuate the dramatic turn, and for the first time in his life, the billionaire experienced what it truly felt like to be exposed before an audience. The moment stretched, the room frozen in tension, before the applause for the maid finally broke out, loud, enthusiastic, and undeniable. She had turned doubt into admiration, laughter into silence, and arrogance into embarrassment. The billionaire, who had once believed he ruled the evening, now stood humbled, forced to acknowledge not just her talent, but the lesson it carried, a lesson in humility, respect, and the danger of underestimating someone based solely on appearances. And as the applause echoed through the grand hall, the billionaire finally lowered his gaze, a mixture of pride and shame flickering across his features. The maid, though modest and composed, had forever changed the dynamics of the room. Her performance had not just entertained, it had upended social assumptions, humbled a man who had believed himself untouchable, and left a story that every guest would recount for years to come. In that single, unforgettable moment, the public embarrassment was complete, and the truth undeniable. Skill, courage, and authenticity could conquer arrogance, and sometimes, the most underestimated person in the room is the one who leaves the greatest mark. The room was still buzzing with the aftermath of what had just happened. Even though the performance had ended, the energy lingered, heavy with awe and admiration. Guests continued to murmur, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others exchanging glances that said without words, "We just witnessed something extraordinary." The billionaire, once the center of attention, now stood quietly in a corner, a shadow of his former arrogance, processing a lesson he had never imagined he would learn in public. The maid, on the other hand, remained composed, standing tall yet humble, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. She hadn't sought recognition or applause, but the admiration was undeniable. She had stepped forward not to humiliate, but to simply show her skill, to express a talent that had been hidden for far too long. And in doing so, she had done something even more powerful. She had rewritten the expectations of everyone in the room. Whispers turned into conversations, and conversations into reflections, as guests began to realize the significance of what they had seen. This wasn't just a dance, or a challenge, or a moment of entertainment. It was a story about perseverance, humility, and the power of talent that exists beyond social status. The maid had proven that greatness can be hidden in the most unlikely places, and that wealth, arrogance, or reputation can never replace dedication and true skill. Even the billionaire, pride wounded yet slowly regaining composure, began to understand the depth of the lesson. He had assumed that power and money could guarantee superiority, that laughter and bravado could command respect, yet none of it had mattered in the face of authentic talent, determination, and courage. His public embarrassment had been complete, and in that moment, he felt a strange mix of shame and enlightenment. He stepped forward, finally, not with his usual theatrics, but with genuine respect. "I underestimated you," he admitted quietly, his voice carrying the weight of humility. The maid nodded gracefully, a small smile acknowledging his words. There was no triumph in gloating, no need for further spectacle. The lesson had been learned, silently but powerfully, for everyone in the room, including the man who thought he ruled the evening. Guests began to approach the maid, some clapping her on the shoulder, others offering words of admiration. The energy of the room had completely shifted, from laughter at arrogance to celebration of true talent, from doubt to acknowledgement, from superiority to respect. The atmosphere was almost electric with the realization that greatness is not measured by wealth, title, or status, but by skill, courage, and the willingness to step forward when opportunity arises. In the following days, the story of the night spread far beyond the mansion, shared on social media, in offices, in casual conversations, and in news stories. People everywhere marveled at the story of the maid who had humbled a billionaire, and at the lesson it carried, that talent and determination could not be ignored, that appearances could be deceiving, and that humility is often the mark of true greatness. The billionaire himself reflected on the experience long after the guests had gone. The embarrassment of the evening lingered, yes, but so did the recognition of something he had often overlooked, the value of respect, humility, and acknowledgement of others' abilities. He realized that life had a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected forms, and that even someone with immense power and wealth could learn from those they might have once considered beneath them. For the maid, the night was a quiet victory, not just of skill but of persistence and self-belief. She had faced doubt, mockery, and expectation, yet she had risen above it all. Her performance became a symbol, a reminder to everyone present that hidden potential exists everywhere, and sometimes, it emerges when least expected. She had shown that courage, confidence, and talent are forces that cannot be suppressed, and that humility paired with skill can make the strongest arrogant figures. Pause and reflect. As the night drew to a close, the mansion slowly returned to its usual quiet, but the story lingered, like a spark that refused to fade. The billionaire had been humbled, the maid had been celebrated, and every guest had witnessed a life lesson etched into memory, that true greatness is never about money, arrogance, or status, but about heart, dedication, and the courage to step forward when the world doubts you. And so, the night ended, not with laughter at someone's pride, but with respect, awe, and a lesson that would stay with everyone who had watched, a lesson in humility, perseverance, and the enduring truth that talent can emerge from the most unexpected places, leaving a mark far greater than any fortune.